Hello? If you have a cell phone, would you mind turning it off right now? That way we don't have interruptions while we are having this commemoration. And we're going to be starting. So hello everyone. My name's Diane Weber, and I'm the chair of the HaShoah committee. I'm also a daughter of the Holocaust survivors, and I also happen to be the JFS community social worker. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening to our community's annual Holocaust commemoration put on by the Jewish Federation and our Jewish Community Relations Council. I can only imagine what my parents, as well as so many other parents, went through. We heard, we did bear witness, we listened if they were willing to share, we comforted when able. I had the opportunity to visit Hamburg a few years ago, where I saw the stumbling stones from my father's family. Throughout the city, one can see the many households where Jewish families once lived. As noted from this project, the horror didn't start with Auschwitz, Treblinka, or in other camps. It started in our neighborhoods, in our house, outside our doors. This subject matter of Christianity and the Holocaust is a topic we have not covered at this commemoration in the past. We hope you find this informative, educational, and hope you share with others who are not able to attend. So hopefully you've gotten the book, so look at the back of the book for a scroll of names. So now I'd like to welcome Rabbi Reuben to the bima.
בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתממיה, עם כל זה אני מאמין. אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין, באמונה שלמה, בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתממיה, עם כל זה אני מאמין. אני מאמין, אני מאמין,
Good evening. My name is Mona Alfie, and as both the Senior Rabbi of Congregation B'nai Israel and as the President of the Sacramento Area Board of Rabbis, it is with a heavy heart that I welcome all of you here tonight for our community-wide Yom HaShoah Memorial Service. It is with a heavy heart, not only because it is always painful to remember the tragedy of the Holocaust, but also because we are carrying the extra burden of living at a time when our beloved country and countries around the world are experiencing an alarming surge in anti-Semitism, xenophobia, hatred, and racism. For me, the true horror of the Holocaust was not only the mass murders, but also the massive silence and indifference those murders were met with by ordinary people. Neighbors who turned a blind eye as the people they had lived next door to for years were carted off to the death camps or murdered in the streets. The lack of meaningful protest as Germany turned from a democracy into a brutal dictatorship. The many countries that willingly complied with the Nazi regime to send their own citizens to the death camps. And it all started with the hateful propaganda that people eagerly swallowed so as to justify the atrocities that were being done so flagrantly for all the world to see. In Deuteronomy 22:3, it's written, Lo tucha lehitalem. This is usually translated as, you shall not remain indifferent. But what it really means is, you may not hide yourself. The Bible commands us that not only should we not be indifferent to the suffering of our fellow humans, but we must also not hide ourselves from that suffering either. We cannot close our eyes to hatred or discrimination or pretend that we don't see it, but rather we must always actively fight against it. Sadly, we still live in a world that finds it easy to turn away and do nothing when people suffer discrimination and cruelty. Yom HaShoah is an eternal reminder of what happens when ordinary people do nothing to stop prejudice and discrimination at its root, and allows small injustices or callous words to grow and grow into national or even global atrocities. On this Yom HaShoah, may we renew our commitment to ensuring that what happened to us will not happen again, not only to us, but to anyone.
Shalom and good evening. My name is Barry Broad, and I'm the president of the Jewish Federation of the Sacramento region. I want to welcome you to what is perhaps the most important program we put on all year, our community-wide Yom HaShoah commemoration. This is a time for us to gather across the region, regardless of religion, regardless of affiliation, regardless of our beliefs, and remember together what happened and what can happen. There is no comparison, thank God, to the Holocaust. But there are other Holocausts that have occurred. And sadly, it feels like we're a little closer today to a next Holocaust than we were yesterday or the day before or 10 years ago. That's a shocking development, and I want to go off my script for a second to explain how really important this is. An incident occurred at Cal State Sacramento last month. It was in the news, in which 3 film students were making a podcast at the university. They were art students, and the subject of their podcast touched on the question of banned art during the Nazi period. And the sound engineer, who was an employee of the university, we really don't know the motivation. Really doesn't matter. In the middle of it said, Heil Hitler, and made a Nazi salute. Bad. Very bad. But the really bad thing is when the university employee that finally was willing to listen to them about what had happened. An employee in charge of dealing with bias matters at the university didn't know what a Nazi salute was or what Heil Hitler meant. Which means it's so critical, especially now, especially as the last of the witnesses to the Holocaust, the direct witnesses, are dying out. Now is the time that the real job begins. The job of the world maintaining that memory and not forgetting and not turning the Holocaust into a far away historical thing that happened to some other people in the distant past. That's why we're here. I know that what is taking place in our world and the dramatic spike in anti-Semitism and the attacks on reason worry all of us. And we have reason to worry. We can't turn away. We can't run away. We can't pretend it isn't happening. It is for these reasons that programs like tonight are so important. Before we continue, I want to thank a few people who made this possible. Diane Weber, who you've met, the chair of tonight's program, and our Jewish Family Services social worker, our wonderful Yom HaShoah committee, Karen Rubin, Marissa Califer, and Jessica Braverman-Birch, who helped put this on, and our emeritus Yom HaShoah committee, who made this happen for so many years in the past. Thank all of you who keep this critical program going. I also want to thank our friends at the Central Valley Holocaust Educators Network, who, through their tireless efforts, have supported this program and brought education and light about the Holocaust to the school systems throughout this region. I also want to thank the Federation staff for their hard work on this program. And I want to express our appreciation for the elected officials, for community leaders, and for clergy of all faiths are here tonight. I think for those of you who are not Jewish, I think you need to understand that when anti-Semitism happens, we feel alone. We feel alone. And when you show up for us, it means more than you can ever imagine. Because the reality is, our history is that the cavalry never arrived. And if anything, that's the true story of what happened in the Holocaust, and the true story of the little Holocausts and the big Holocausts and all these horrors, is that the people who it's not affected directly are not there because they could stop it. I want to thank our hosts, Congregation B'nai Israel, and the Sacramento Board of Rabbis, and Rabbi Alfie, who is the head of the Board of Rabbis, for participating in this program, for hosting this program, and for being the spiritual leaders of our community. You are the glue that holds us together. It is now my pleasure to call up Jason Weiner, chair of our Jewish Community Relations Council. Whoa, you don't look like Jason.
I am not Jason. He was unable to be here. My name is Jocelyn Herman, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the Jewish Community Relations Council. I was raised in this community. I grew up at Temple or Rishon, was educated at Roseville Public Schools, and I'm happy to be back, part of the greater Sacramento Jewish community as an adult. Like probably many of you here, I don't remember not knowing about the Holocaust. It's a foundational part of my education, as important and true to me as being an American or being Jewish. So as a child, I thought everyone knew about the Holocaust. I was wrong. I vividly remember the freshman year history teacher who asked everyone to raise their hand if they had heard of the Holocaust. And I truly thought this was one of the dumbest questions I'd ever heard. Of course everyone knows about the Holocaust. So I raised my hand. Maybe 5 or 10 other students raised their hand. These were kids who had been in school with me my whole life, and they didn't know the word Holocaust. This formative memory has stood out to me as an important reminder of Holocaust education and access to books and stories about the Holocaust. Now, thankfully, due to public education, these kids in my class got a basic understanding of the Holocaust. But that's not true for a lot of kids in this country. Over 60% of Gen Z and millennials don't know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Shoah. Not only is Holocaust education not compulsory in every state, but some states and school districts and schools are going further and banning books. Books that most of us have read. Night, Moss, Sophie's Choice, Number the Stars, The Diary of Anne Frank. These stories, I think, are instrumental to Holocaust education, but to remembering the Holocaust, to understanding it. They humanize the tragedy that occurred. I don't need to tell anyone here to never forget the Holocaust. We're here on the eve of Yom HaShoah to actively remember those that were murdered. But if we want those outside of the Jewish community to never forget, we have to first ensure they're taught. Thankfully, that same study found that most, over 64% of millennials and Gen Z, and that's people under 42, so not kids anymore, believe that the Holocaust education should be compulsory. And over 80% believe that the Holocaust should be taught. We need to ensure that these stories, that this education, that these books are available for everyone regardless of where they live and for future generations. Thank you very much, and I understand we now have a video by Mayor Steinberg, who could not be here tonight.
I'm Darrell Steinberg, the mayor of Sacramento. I want to welcome all of you to this very, very important event, Yom HaShoah, where we vow to never forget, to honor the victims of the Holocaust, and to talk among ourselves and with our community about what it will take to ensure that what happened to our people, what has happened to too many people throughout the centuries, never happens again. History can be very painful, and the history of what led to the Holocaust may be especially sensitive and poignant, but we have to talk about it. We have to talk about Christianity and all the chapters of European and world history where faith was perverted to perpetuate discrimination and hatred and destruction, attempted destruction of the Jewish people. We need to have this conversation honestly. And at the same time, always remember the righteous Gentiles, the Christians who spoke up, who stood out, who protected Jews during the Holocaust, because they are the antidote, and they are the representation of what faith of all kinds can mean if it is practiced in a way that is healing, that is inclusive, and that is loving instead of divisive. And so let's have the conversation, and let's join our Christian brothers and sisters in our community who are working hard every day with the Jewish community to bring peace, to bring justice, and to make sure that no one is left out and left behind. Thank you to the Jewish Federation of Sacramento for tackling this very, very sensitive and difficult subject. But unless we confront the past, and unless we confront the history, no matter how sensitive and painful it might be, well, we know what happens. We're doomed to allow the haters who still exist out there to continue to use faith in ways that are perverted and that aren't consistent with the teachings of all of our religious faiths, that the essence of religion is love. The best of religion, the best of faith, is centered on the principles of humanity, love, justice, togetherness, acceptance of all people, and respect for everyone, regardless of who they are and regardless of how they believe. Thank you again. This is a very important evening.
Hanna Senish was born July 17th, 1921, into a Hungarian Jewish middle-class family. She went to a private Protestant secondary school where she was one of a small number of Jewish students. She eventually encountered institutionalized anti-Semitism, and her response was to become an ardent Zionist intent on settling in Palestine. So she goes to Israel. She completes 2 years of study at the Agricultural School for Young Women in Nahalal, and she joins a newly organized kibbutz called Sdot Yam. It was there at Sdot Yam, located a short distance along the Mediterranean coast from the ancient port city of Caesarea, that she writes, Halicha LeCaesarea, and we know it as Eli, Eli. Page 5. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rishu shel hamayim, berak HaShamayim, tvilat Adam, hachol v'hayam, rishu shel hamayim, berak HaShamayim, tvilat Adam. Oh Lord, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
Good evening. My name is Karen Rubin, and I am a member of Sacramento's Yom HaShoah Committee,
and a second-gen participant. I'm also a trustee at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, where I first met Sister Dr. Carol Rittner when she received the American Spirit Medallion from the museum last year. One might think that a nun would not have much street cred lecturing about the Holocaust. But if you thought that about Sister Carol, you would be sorely mistaken. In 1984, Sister Carol organized an international conference on Christians helping Jews during the Holocaust. In 1985, she produced and was nominated for an Academy Award for A Courage to Care, a short documentary film about Christians who saved Jews during the Holocaust. From 1986 to 1990, she was the director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Humanity. She left that position to become president of Mercy Works. In 1994, she was invited by Stockton University, New Jersey, to be the Ida E. King Distinguished Visiting Professor of Holocaust Studies. When that ended, she was invited to stay on as the Dr. Marcia Radikoff Grossman Professor in Holocaust Studies at Stockton University. She retired, I use that term very loosely, in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my friend, Sister Carol.
First, I want to thank everyone, all of you, for being here, and of course, Karen for recommending me as your speaker this year for Yom HaShoah. It's really an honor for me, so thank you all very much. The Holocaust and the Christian world seems an unlikely combination of ideas. Surely nothing could be further removed from the principles, ethics, and aspirations of well-intentioned Christians than to have Christianity linked to one of the greatest episodes of human hatred in history. But that is precisely what I shall be doing this evening, commenting on how and why I believe Christianity is, unfortunately, linked to the Holocaust, one of the greatest episodes of human hatred in history. First, however, a few personal comments. Gregory Baum, a Canadian Catholic theologian, once asked a group of scholars, primarily theologians and historians, what the relationship was between their personal lives and their academic interests. He did so because he believed that one's research and thinking are always based on personal concerns. In other words, he believed that there are always highly personal reasons why certain issues mean so much to us, although we may not always recognize that relationship. I am a Roman Catholic nun, a member of the Sisters of Mercy. Most of my academic life has been devoted to studying, teaching, and writing about the Holocaust. Frequently, I am asked how I became involved in this work, which has been my passion for more than 50 years. Occasionally, people ask me if I am Jewish, mistakenly assuming that dedicated attention to Holocaust history is something that only Jews are likely to pursue. To the question, are you Jewish? I would be happy and proud to answer yes, but my identity is different. I have immersed myself in a study of the Holocaust because I believe my identity as a Christian is linked to this catastrophe. I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a family of 4 children with a Catholic mother and a Protestant father. I went to public school through 8th grade, then on to a Catholic high school for my secondary education. After graduating from high school, I went on to college, completing my freshman year, then entered the convent, as we used to say. After completing my bachelor's degree and the religious formation program of the Sisters of Mercy, I was sent to teach English in a Catholic high school in northeastern Pennsylvania. 4 years later, I was sent to graduate school at the University of Maryland. Just as I was making the transition from teaching to studying, someone gave me a copy of Viktor Frankl's Holocaust memoir, Man's Search for Meaning. I had never heard of Viktor Frankl, a Viennese psychiatrist whose entire family, except for his sister, perished in Nazi Germany's death camp. But I did know about Anne Frank, a young Jewish girl who died at the hands of the Nazis. To be honest, when I taught the diary of Anne Frank to my Catholic high school students, I knew very little about the historical events surrounding Anne Frank and the Jews of Europe during the 1930s and 40s. Of course, I knew Jews had suffered during World War II, but about the Holocaust, about Hitler's planned systematic attempt to annihilate every Jew on the face of the earth, I still had much to learn. Consequently, it did not occur to me to raise questions with my students or even with myself about collaboration with or resistance to the Nazis in Holland, Germany, or any other place in Europe during World War II and the Holocaust. Much less did I think about anti-Judaism in Christian theology or anti-Semitism in church and society. My ignorance about these historical issues surrounding the Holocaust, not to mention my ignorance about Jews and Judaism, disabled me. I was not able to probe beneath the surface of the words Anne Frank had written in her diary during those 2 years she lived in the shadow of death in that cramped attic on the top floor of that narrow building in Amsterdam. I read and taught the diary of Anne Frank as a story about the triumph of the human spirit, not as a primary document revealing a historical catastrophe. But what I missed when I read Anne's diary, I could not avoid when I read Viktor Frankl's memory, Man's Search for Meaning. Perhaps it was because when I read Frankl's book, I was a bit more mature, freer emotionally and intellectually. I cannot say now, but I do remember that when I finished reading Man's Search for Meaning, I was shattered. How, I asked myself, could a place like Auschwitz have existed within the heart of so-called Christian Europe? How could human beings turn their most heinous, ferocious powers on themselves? How could they separate Jews from others in the human family, force them into concentration camps, demean and starve them, then funnel them into gas chambers and burn them in ovens? Where were the Christian churches? Where were Christians? Why didn't they help Jews in their time of need? What happened to the great teachings of Jesus taught to Christians through the ages? Do unto others as you would have them do to you. What you do to the least of your brothers and sisters, you do unto me. No one has greater love than this, to lay down their life for their friends. Today, those questions seem naive to me, but as a very young teacher and sister of mercy, I did not yet know that Hitler and the Nazis had built their deadly ideology on the twin foundations of Christian theological anti-Judaism and racist anti-Semitism. It was only later, after much study in scripture and theology, renewed and re-energized as a result of Vatican II, that I came to see an anti-Jewish underside to Christian theology. At the time, it was something about which I was completely ignorant, yet it was this anti-Jewish underside to Christian theology that over the centuries had influenced millions upon millions of Christians, and not just Catholic Christians, but all Christians, Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians alike, regarding what we believed and thought about Jews and Judaism, and what we Christians believed and thought about Jews and Judaism was nothing short of deadly. For nearly 2 millennia, the Christian church justified their messianic reading of the scriptures with a refutation of Judaism and the negation of Jewish existence before God. For centuries, Christian preachers and teachers argued that the Jewish people had never understood the prophetic message, not even in the days of the prophets, that they had never known God, that they had always lived in blindness and infidelity, and that they rejected Jesus as the Messiah of God because they were hard-hearted and stubborn. Not only did they say that the Jews had rejected Jesus as the Messiah, but they also said that the Jews condemned him to death, and in that way excluded themselves from God's mercy and love. The negation of Jews and Judaism, which the Christian churches symbolized in their doctrines, their sermons and liturgy for centuries, and in which kings and other secular rulers incarnated in their laws and social structures, produced an endless series of persecutions and pogroms, and helped to fuel a genocidal hatred by men and women who often were unaware of the sources of their own compulsive animosity. Many years ago, a friend asked me to speak to our high school students about Christianity and the Holocaust. I began by asking them, "What do you expect of Christians?" There was the usual silence and hesitation until one young man raised his hand and said something that has stuck with me. He said, "I expect Christians to practice what they preach." I've thought about what that young man said many times since that afternoon more than 40 years ago, because I expect Christians to practice what they preach is an expectation that cuts both ways, positively and negatively. To identify what I mean as positively, let me quote the Jewish scholar Daniel Jonah Goldhagen. "Christianity," he writes, "is a religion of love that teaches its members the highest moral principles for acting well. Love your neighbor, seek peace, help those in need, sympathize with and raise up the oppressed. Do to others as you would have them do to you." On the other hand, to quote Goldhagen again, "Christianity also spread throughout its domain a Megatherian hatred of the Jews. In its sacred texts and doctrines, it libelously accused Jews of being Christ killers, children of the devil, desecrators, and defilers of all goodness, responsible for an enormous range of human calamities and suffering. This hatred led Christians over the course of almost 2 millennia to commit many grave crimes and injuries against Jews, including mass murder. Thus, the precedents for the Aryan laws, the ghettos, the pogroms, and the anti-Semitic rhetoric and imagery that permeated Nazi propaganda began much, much earlier than the rise of Hitler and the Nazis in the 20th century. The origins of the targeting of Jews in Christian Europe can be found in the language of some of the Gospels and the early church fathers, and the language of prejudice against Jews and Judaism. Existing centuries before Nazism, Christianity's negative images of Jews and Judaism, supported by the institutions and social relationships that promoted those stereotypes, played key parts in bolstering the racial and genocidal anti-Semitism of Adolf Hitler and his Third Reich. There can be no doubt about it. Christianity's anti-Jewish elements provided essential background, preparation, and motivation for the Holocaust that happened when Germans and their collaborators carried out the final solution of the so-called Jewish question. Let me be clear here. National Socialism was not a Christian movement, and many of the factors that brought and kept the Nazis in power had nothing directly to do with religion, even though some facts about the history of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust are very much related to religion. By the time Hitler and the Nazis achieved power, they had a fertile seedbed of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors in so-called Christian society, among Christians themselves, to exploit for their own vicious purposes. The Nazi destruction process did not come out of a void. Christians had been prepared by centuries of anti-Jewish preaching and teaching, by anti-Jewish regulations and legislation, by anti-Jewish prejudice and practice. While Christianity was not a sufficient condition for the Holocaust, it was a necessary condition for that disaster. That statement does not mean that Christianity caused the Holocaust, but it does mean that apart from anti-Jewish images that have been deeply rooted in Christian practice, it is doubtful that so many Germans and other Europeans, French, Dutch, Polish, Ukrainian, Latvian, Belgian, and others, would have been bystanders to what was happening to the Jews in their midst, or would have become such willing executioners in places like Warsaw and Babi Yar, Auschwitz and Birkenau, Treblinka and Chelmno, nor would they have been such compliant and complicit bystanders in Rome, Augsburg, Athens, Kiev, and elsewhere throughout occupied Europe during the Holocaust. During the Nazi era, World War II, and the Holocaust, some Christians did speak out against the persecution of the Jews, while others collaborated with the Nazis, and still others remained silent, neither for nor against, as Elie Wiesel, himself a survivor of the Holocaust, put it. However, those Christians who risked their lives to help Jews during the Holocaust were very few indeed. As the Protestant evangelical Christian scholar David Rausch says, the historian is overwhelmed with the question, what made the difference? What made the difference between the few who helped the Jewish people during their dreadful persecution and the multitude who turned their backs on them? What is that moral kernel within our psychological, mental, or religious makeup that makes some react differently from the multitude in the face of prejudice, scapegoating, caricature, oppression, and outright physical violence to a race or religious group different from their own? That is a difficult question in light of the Holocaust, as its study reveals that only a few evangelicals, a few Protestants, a few Catholics, a few Orthodox, a few agnostics, and a few atheists, and not necessarily in that order, helped the Jewish people during their persecution. To carry out the Holocaust, the Nazis needed the cooperation of non-Jews who were under their domination, not necessarily as killers, but as bystanders, as people who would not interfere with their dirty, rotten killing business. Helen Fine's landmark study, Accounting for Genocide, shows that the single most important determinant of Nazi success in murder was not the behavior of the murderers who sought to destroy Jews everywhere, nor was it the behavior of the Jews, generally unsuccessful when it came to escaping or resisting the genocide. The key determinant of murder rates, which varied from 95% killed in Poland and the Baltic countries to 95% saved in Denmark, was the behavior of the bystanders. Bystanders' disapproval, condemnation, or active resistance made enormous differences during the Holocaust when it came to the Jews. In Nazi Germany in the 1930s and later in German-occupied Europe in the 1940s, there were so many bystanders that they set the norm for how people should act. In Nazi Germany and later in German-occupied Europe, in Ursha describes the behavior of the churches and their leaders. Churches throughout Europe were mostly silent as Jews were persecuted, deported, and murdered. Of course, there were some exceptions. The Danish Lutheran Church, for example. In occupied France, there were several French Catholic bishops who spoke up on behalf of the Jews. In Holland, some Catholic and Protestant leaders spoke up and spoke out against their German occupiers and their persecution of the Jews. The Synod of the Bulgarian Orthodox bishops also courageously spoke out on behalf of the Jews. In Nazi Germany itself, in September 1935, as the Nuremberg laws were being enacted, there were a few Christians in the Protestant Confessing Church who demanded that their church take a public stand in defense of the Jews. By and large, however, the Christian churches, Catholic, Protestant, and Christian Orthodox alike, sought to act as institutions often tend to do, in their own best interests that were often narrowly defined and short-sighted. Generally speaking, the leaders of the Christian churches, Catholic and Protestant alike, did not urge their faithful to live out the highest moral principles for acting well when it came to the Jews who were being hunted down all over occupied Europe during the Holocaust. Their failure to respond to the horrid events happening to Jews and others was not due to ignorance. Christian leaders, bishops, archbishops, pastors, the Pope knew what was happening around them, but they were impotent, fearful, ineffective, struggling to survive the great catastrophe of World War II in Europe. I think it's important to keep in mind that the Holocaust was no accident of history. The systematic murder of the Jews did not happen by chance, nor did the genocide of the Roma, nor did the mass murder of disabled persons and the persecution and murder of homosexuals and dissidents. The Holocaust occurred because people willed it, planned it, and carried it through. It occurred because people made choices which allowed it to happen. It occurred not least because people remained silent. The Holocaust represents the outcome of a massive failure by many institutions, political, legal, cultural, educational, and above all, religious institutions. The Holocaust convicts Christianity, convicts Christian leaders of the failure to preach, teach, and create solidarity across religious lines and between and among people of different faiths or none. It reveals that the various Christian religious and ethical traditions in Europe and beyond treated Jews as other, thereby distancing Christians from Jews. This lack of respect for those who were different, who were other, encouraged bystanding during the Nazi era, encouraged those who were not being persecuted to look out only for themselves and their own, to make little or no effort to check the aggressors. Not until Vatican II and its declaration Nostra Aetate in our time, this is now 1965, did the mainstream Christian churches, Protestant as well as Catholic, seriously begin to critique their negative preaching and teaching about Jews and Judaism. While we Christians cannot change the facts of history, we can put back into our books the pages of history that we have torn out, but Jews have committed to memory. The questions that plagued me as a much younger student, as a graduate student, as a young Sister of Mercy, and even now as an academic, questions like what happened to the Golden Rule during the Holocaust? Why didn't more Christians come to the aid of their Jewish colleagues and neighbors, even their Jewish spouses and relatives, now seem very obvious to me. They were disabled by centuries, indeed millennia, of anti-Jewish preaching and teaching, anti-Jewish polemic and politics, anti-Jewish legislation and practice. It is a wonder that any Christians at all were able to break out of such a vicious mindset and culture to help the Jews during the Holocaust. A few minutes ago, I quoted the Protestant evangelical Christian scholar David Rausch, who said, the historian is overwhelmed with the question, what made the difference? What made the difference between the few who helped the Jewish people during their dreadful persecution and the multitude who turned their backs on them? Of course, I cannot answer his questions definitively, but allow me to at least say a few words in response to those probing questions. As I've already tried to argue, when the Nazis embarked on their evil effort to destroy the European Jews, the millions of people under Nazi domination during World War II and the Holocaust, the vast majority of whom were baptized Christians, had three options: to help the Nazis, to help the Jews, or to do nothing either way. Those were the three options. During the Holocaust, it was as easy for people to say the Jews are a problem as it was to say the Jews are not my problem. In fact, many people said the Jews have nothing to do with me or mine or us. I have my own family, myself, to worry about. But some people could not say such things. They could not join in persecuting and harassing Jews, much less torturing and murdering Jews. They could not turn their backs on the Jewish people who were being hunted down all over Europe. Some people had to act. They had to do something to help the despised, vulnerable, isolated, frightened Jews. For sure, the people who helped Jews were not angels or saints. If you've seen the film Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg makes it clear that Oskar Schindler was not a saint. The Gentiles, many were Christian, but not all, who tried to resist the Nazis in their death project, who tried to help the Jews during the Holocaust, were ordinary human beings. It's important to remember that. Like the Nazi persecutors, who were neither devils nor monsters, but ordinary human beings as well, rescuers lived in the same moral sphere as the other 700 million people who walked the footpaths and streets of Nazi-dominated Europe. They breathed the same air, had the same fears, and faced the same challenges as did other people in Europe. It is a mistake to make the perpetrators other than what they were, ordinary human beings. And it's a mistake to make the righteous more than what they were, ordinary human beings. For it allows us to say, I'm not like them. I'm just an ordinary person, neither a monster, a perpetrator, nor a saint, a rescuer. I am neither capable of killing like the perpetrators, nor of helping like the righteous. We must not make either the perpetrators or the rescuers larger than life. Rather, we must keep them as what they were, life-size, during a time when humanity was diminished. The story of people who helped Jews is not simply the tale of a single noble act of letting someone or many into one's home for a few days, or of hiding Jews in one's barn for a few weeks or months. Rather, the story of helpers and rescuers during the Holocaust is the story of a continuous struggle against enormous odds to save one or more Jews, men, women, and children, old and young, rich and poor, agreeable or disagreeable. Not even all the Jews were saints. As of January 2022, 28,217 non-Jews have been honored by Yad Vashem in Jerusalem for helping Jews during the Holocaust. What do we know about them? What we know is that these good people rescued the concept of the human being as a being capable of choice, even in the midst of a despairing situation and against the most improbable odds. We know that neither gender, nor age, nor nationality, nor education, nor profession, nor economic class, nor religious learning, nor political persuasion played a determining role as to who would be a rescuer. Whereas most people surrender personal responsibility for their actions when those actions are dictated by an authority figure, the rescuers of Jews obviously did not. Why not? Most studies indicate that as children, in a very significant number of cases, the rescuers were raised in homes where love was in abundance, where parents were altruistic and tolerant, and where children were disciplined by reason and explanation, and where they were taught 5 essential principles: that human beings are basically the same and differences between them are to be respected, that the world is not divided into us and them, but rather contains a common bond of humanity, that they should have a clear sense of right and wrong, should stand up for their beliefs, have moral integrity, self-confidence, and self-worth, that kindness and compassion toward others should be practiced, and that they should be of independent mind, self-sustaining, and never follow the crowd. The actions of the righteous during the Holocaust constitute a vivid and powerful communal memory bank that can help to liberate us from the paralyzing excuse, "There isn't anything I can do," and can encourage us to acknowledge and embrace a foundational motivation for human behavior: concern for the other. Perhaps the most important thing we know about the rescuers is that they are absolutely ordinary. That is, people like us. To view them as heroes beyond our reach is to run the risk of becoming passive admirers, of becoming bystanders, as it were. Although exemplary, the rescuers face the same fears we face when confronted with choices that put our lives in jeopardy if we act to help people who are in danger from other people intent on harming them, rather than helping them. I have mostly spoken about the influences of family and upbringing on what made the difference in some people as to whether or not they would help Jews during the Holocaust. So let me now say a final word about what may have motivated some Christians to help Jews. Not to excuse the organized Christian communities for their failures during the Holocaust, but to add to your own thinking about the Holocaust and the Christian world. To do this, I want to quote David Gushee, an ethicist and public intellectual at Mercer University in Savannah, Georgia, whose doctoral dissertation focused on Christian rescuers during the Holocaust. His research revealed that there were some Christians who rescued Jews due to a sense of obedience to biblical teachings about compassion, love, and justice. They read the biblical passages such as the story of the Good Samaritan or the command to love God and neighbor wholeheartedly, and became convinced that these teachings applied directly to the grave situation at hand. To disregard these teachings would be to disobey God, and they were unwilling to do that, despite the risks that rescue created. Christian leaders sometimes, though not often enough, help Christians understand what was at stake by articulating the moral evil of Nazism and its murderous policies. Resistance at this level was led by theologians and church leaders, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, in different contexts, who preached and taught that Nazism was a heresy and/or that the mass murder of the Jews was a horrible evil. Their words, and sometimes their deeds, inspired grassroots Christians to participate in rescue activities. Overall, research about the Christian churches and their leaders, from Pope Pius XII down to the most obscure Catholic priest, Protestant pastor, and Orthodox Christian priest in Nazi-dominated Europe during World War II and the Holocaust, generally failed miserably to live up to the teachings of the Christian churches about the highest moral principles for acting well. Love your neighbor, seek peace, help those in need, sympathize with and raise up the oppressed, do to others as you would have them do to you. Yes, there were exceptions. A small percentage of baptized Christians in Europe found reasons to resist the Nazi killing machine and courageously did so. But a great majority sat on the sidelines and did nothing, while scores of thousands organized and carried out the murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. That some people helped Jews should encourage and inspire all of us to learn from them. At the same time that we Christians learn from them, we Christians must resolve to do what we can now and in the future to never again abandon the Jewish people or any people in a time of need.
So I'd like to now call up Barbara Brass, a fellow second gen. She's the daughter of Holocaust survivors, an activist in our local community, a documentarist, and a dear friend.
Thank you. It's truly an honor for me to be able to share this, and the greatest honor is that my mother is here. I wrote this poem for her 40 years ago and never thought that I would have the joy to be able to reiterate it with a few amendments 40 years later for her 90th year. So this is called Laura's Big 5-0, which is now her Big 9-0. 90 years ago, you see, plus 3 days to boot, a little girl was born in a place called Landeshut, not in California, New York, or Tennessee, but across the wide Atlantic there in Germany. 6 years did she live there with Mama and Papa dear. The need to leave was urgent, for their lives they feared. Off with Papa far away, to Mama a sad goodbye, to a strange and distant land for 11 years, Shanghai. Growing up in China, no pizza, TV, or stereo. How she ever did it, I'll surely never know. Times were tough, but could not stop the patient, ardent suitor who in the post-war 40s continued to pursue her. A gentle, brave, and dashing man made his presence known. He let her know that his goal was to make for her a home. The ship was fully laden to Germany once more. Then came a golden moment, America's open door. Chicago harbored Al Capone and gave Laura a temporary home. A gun moll she was not cut out to be, so headed for California at the first opportunity. July 13th, 1952 marked the day that two became one. Heinz and Laura hit Reno by storm. About 9 months later, little Barbara was born. Fresno, Oakland, then San Jose, and 2 years later, Kathy came their way. With two little angels sitting on their knees, the decision was made to go for three. Phyllis arrived in 57 to add to their lives a little more heaven. These three ladies were lucky, I'll say, mother, father, and Opa to stay. Santa Clara in 1960, and the times got a little sticky. Hours of devoted love and attention, she helped her father through times too tough to mention. Many happy years as daughter, mother, and wife to add richness to a full and varied life. Family vacations, they all piled in the car, laughing and singing to destinations near and far. Raising three teenage daughters for 10 years or so, how she ever managed, I'll never really know. Always taking classes, she cooked, she sewed, she baked, loving her whole family, of that there was no mistake. A dreadful day in 75, her beloved husband no longer alive. Much time it takes for deep wounds to heal, and how much pain she did conceal. Working daily at O'Connor, a full-time job was bestowed upon her. 2 years later, more grief was added. Her father died, and all were saddened. To hard times it is strength we owe, and Laura's got it, that we know. Two of the Brass girls got happily married. She pulled that off without seeming harried. 3 loving daughters who truly care, and many friends their love do share. She works all day and takes time to travel, swims like a demon, and will even play Scrabble. So now that all is said and done, and all our hearts are clear, let's lift our champagne glasses high and toast this lady dear. Thank you.
I invite us to turn to page 11 and please rise for El Mali Rachamim and remain standing. רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כי זוהר הרקיע מזהירים את כל הנשמות של 6,000,000 היהודים, חללי השואה באירופה שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו ושנספו על קידוש השם. בדמי המרצחים הגרמנים, הנאצים ועוזריהם משאר העמית. לכן בעל הרחמים יסירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימים, ונאמר אמן.
As we prepare for Mourner's Cottage on page 12, I invite my colleagues to come stand up here with us together. And I'm going to go off script, inspired by Barry's going off script. And I'm going to ask other clergy who are here with us today in the spirit of our theme tonight to come stand up here with us in solidarity as we speak the words of Mourner's Cottage. So other clergy members, other faiths, please come stand with us. We're honored to have you here with us.
We'll join together Kaddish Klali on page 12. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah ve'alma divra kirutei ve'amlik malchutei b'chayimon v'mechon v'chayei yatot be'Yisrael b'adalav v'zman kariv yimru amen Yehei shemei rabbah haborah haram omer omaya Yibarach v'yishabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei v'yisha v'yichu Le'ela min kol berachata v'shirata tu'ishmechata v'nechemata damiran v'yama v'yimru amen Yehei shlomo rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'l'kol Yisrael v'yimru amen Oseh shalom b'romav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Israel v'imru Amen.
Just as our mourner's Kaddish goes against what one would expect and not focusing on the absence that we feel, but on the wonderful and magnificent presence that we feel in our lives, our national anthem of Israel goes against type a bit too, not focusing on rockets' red glare or the wars and battles that brought it into being, but the hope that sustained us through these terrible times and the hope that we sustain continually for the life of the state of Israel. If we have any students from any of our schools who were invited to be here, from any of our synagogues, from Shalom School, please come up and join us, because you are our faith. You are what keeps us going. So that I see some of you out there. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be shy, because you are what gives us faith. That Judaism will continue and that Israel will continue. So please remain standing for Hatikvah. It's on page 13 in your books. And thank you all so much for coming. I know it's a school night. Okay, again, page 13. Kol od balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi homiyah, ufateh mizrach kadima, ayin letzion Sophia. Od lovda tikvatenu, hatikva בת שנות אלפיים, ליותם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים, ליותם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים.
You can all be seated. I've never said that before. So. Hello, everyone. My name is Willie Recht, and I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation, and I thank you for joining us tonight on this most important program. Thank you to Sister Carol for sharing your insight, your story, and your knowledge with us, and to our clergy and leadership for making this program possible. I also want to thank our amazing committee and the talented professional staff, both at the Federation and B'nai Israel, who worked tirelessly to make this happen. I also want to thank our host, B'nai Israel, and the sponsors of our snacks this evening, Best Shalom. Thank you for that. It's very important, and we appreciate it. Before we end, I wanted to share a thought with you. Last month, I was fortunate to join my husband and 150 other young Jewish adults on Federation's National Cabinet mission in Budapest. And as some of you can relate, many of you can relate, I grew up my whole life learning about the Holocaust, whether in secular education, academic education, Sunday school, Hebrew school. And then to be there was more powerful than I could ever imagine. And so as I stood on the banks of the Danube or walked around the Jewish quarter and tried to wrap my head around that 600,000 Jews were killed in 10 weeks in Budapest, I can't. And as I read the ADL's new report, and as I stand here tonight, it just reinforces why we are here and why it is so important and critical that we're here. So, may the 6 million lives who were murdered and lost be for a blessing, and let us never, ever forget. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and please feel free to join us in the social hall.